Okay, we've now got a few more bits of information to work with. We know if a user's in a group or not, and we know if they're online or not. And we can use a combination of those to send a notification to a user if they're not inside a chat with another user. We can send them a prompt to say that they've received a new message. So let's take a look at how we can do this. Now what we'll do, we'll head back to VS Code, and inside our message hub, what we need to establish is when we're sending a message, if they're not connected to the same chat, which we find out here, if this is negative, then we want to take the opportunity to send them a notification. But we only want to do that if we know that they're online, otherwise it's pointless. So how can we achieve that? Well, in our presence tracker, we're maintaining a dictionary of all of the users that are online and including their connections. And also bear in mind that a user can be connected to our application from multiple devices. So they could have multiple connections to our server, and they would have different connection IDs. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our presence tracker, and we're going to create another method inside here so that we can get a list of connections for a particular user that's stored inside here. So what we'll do, we'll scroll down to the bottom here, and we're going to say public task and return a list of strings, and we're going to say get connections for user, and we're going to pass in a string of the username. And because we're inside our presence tracker, we're going to need to lock our dictionary once again. So we're going to say string, list of string, and we're going to say connection IDs, and then we can say lock online users, and what we want to get from here is our connection IDs. So what we'll do is we'll say online users dot get value or default, and the default for a list, if the user doesn't exist in our connections, then it's simply going to be null. That's the default that we'll be returning if we don't have the value in our dictionary. So we'll say get value or default, and we'll pass in a username. And if we have a dictionary element with a key of username, then this is going to return the list of connection IDs for that particular user. And then what we can do is say return task, and say from results, and we can pass back the connection IDs. So that's all well and good, but there's also something else we need to think about. In our message hub, we can only send messages to users or notifications to users that are connected to this particular hub. And the idea of this, if the user is not connected to this hub or this group, then we want to send them a notification. So how do we do that? Well, luckily we can actually get access to another hub context from within anywhere in our application. Now we'll use it inside our other hub, the message hub, but what we can do, we can scroll up here and we can inject an iHub context, and what we can pass here is our presence hub, and we'll call it presence hub, and then we can initialize this field from parameter. And once again it's made a mess of everything at the top, but I'll just readjust this and reformat things, and that's a bit better. Okay, so now we've got access to our presence hub from within our message hub, and we've got a way to find out if the user is online. So what we can do is we can go back to our send message method, and where we're checking to see if the user is in the same group, what we can also do is add an else condition and say else. And what we'll do is we'll say var connections equals await, and we'll go to our presence tracker, which we need to also inject into here as well. So back up to the top we go, and I'll add a comma, and I'll say presence tracker, and we'll just call it tracker, and I'll initialize the field from parameter, which decides to put it anywhere it feels like it. So once again, I'll have to move things around, and now we've got access to this inside here as well. So let's go back down again. And what we want to do is say await tracker, and we want to get connections for user, and we're interested in the recipient.username. And we're going to say if connections is not equal to null, then we know the user's online, but we also know they're not part of the same message group. And then what we can do is say await, and we can use our presence hub, because if they've got a connection there, then we know they're connected. And we can say clients, and then interestingly, we say clients again, because this can be used to invoke methods on a specified client connections. So for all of the connection IDs that a user might have where they're connected to the presence hub, then we're going to use that, and we're going to pass in here the connections, and then we'll say send async, and we'll say new message received as the name of this message. And then what we'll do, we'll add a new anonymous object. So I'm just going to bring this down. And to create a new anonymous object, we just open empty curly brackets, and we're going to say that the username equals, and we're going to say sender.username, and we're going to also pass down the known as property, and we're going to set this equal to sender.knownAs. And that's what we're going to do if the user's online but not connected to the same group. And then what we can do, we can head back over to our client. So what we'll do is we'll go to our presence service for this one, because this is what's going to happen if the user's not connected to the same message group. And inside here, what we can do is we can say, we can add another new this hub connection on method. So we'll say this.hub connection on, and we're going to say new message received. Obviously be careful with the spelling in all of these. And then what we're receiving from here is an object with a username and a known as property. And inside here what we can do is we can say this.toaster.info, and we can say known as plus, and we'll open some quotes and say has sent you a new message. And let's add an exclamation mark for this one. And then what we can do inside here, for these toasts, we can also route them to a new location. And the way that we can do that is by accessing the onTap. So we'll use onTap, and then we need to use pipe. And we're going to say take one. And then we can subscribe. And inside the subscribe, what we can do is say this.router, which we'll need to inject inside here. So we'll also add our router inside here as well. So we'll say private router and router. And then down here, we can say this.router.navigate by URL. And then we're going to say /members, and then / plus the username. And then we're going to say plus. And what we're going to do is just add the query string directly in here and say tab equals 3, which is going to take them directly to the messages of the user that has sent them the message. Or that's the theory. So let's give this a go. And we'll head back to the browser. And I'm logged in as Lisa over here, and I'm logged in as Bob over here. So if Lisa sends Bob another message and says, "Are you there, Bob?" and presses send, then over here we'll get the message saying Lisa has sent you a new message, and then we can click on this and we're going to get taken straight to our messages. Pretty cool. There is a downside though, there is something that we need to fix, because let's say I'm here as Bob, and let's say I'm viewing another user's profile, and look what happens if I do the same again. So I'm going to say hello again to Bob. And if I go across to the other browser, and then I click on this, well, we get Lisa's profile, but we don't see any of the messages. And that's because we've directly updated the route inside here, but Angular Router is going to try and reuse routes as much as possible. And we can tell it not to do that. And what we need to do is we need to go to our member detail components. And inside the constructor of this one, and we don't have it inside here, but we need access to the router inside here as well. So I'm going to have to add something else in here, and I'll say private router, and we'll call it router. And then what we need to do inside here is say this dot router, and we need to say the root reuse strategy, and then we say should reuse routes, and we pass this a function, and we're just going to set this to false. And what this should mean is if we go back and repeat the same thing we did before, I'll just go across to Bob's version of this, and I'll do what I did before. I'll click on another user. Let's go back to Lewis again. And if I go ahead and send a message again, and then I say, oh, Lisa's sent a new message, I click on this, now we get the messages for Lisa. So we're done. Well, we're kind of done. What we've done is the simplest thing we could possibly do to get this working, but what we'll take a look at next is how we can make this a bit more optimal. And instead of returning everything to everyone, we're just going to return what we need and update things in the client. And we'll take a look at that next.